Hello, everybody, and welcome to our webinar today, looking at the diversity radar that we've been building at Findexable, and a conversation really around how all of us can build fintech ecosystems, fintech companies that accelerate not just digital transformation, but also drive inclusion and with diversity at the front and center of our companies. I'm joined by a really great panel that pretty much spans the globe today, across Africa, from Europe, London, whatever London describes itself as, and also from the US. We're going to do two parts to the conversation today. Firstly, we're going to look a little bit at some of the data that we've been gathering for the Fintech Diversity Radar, the full data set and the report for which launches at the Center for Financial Inclusion Week in Washington in November, and we're going to give you a little bit of a taste of some of the early insights from the data gathering, and then we're going to have a conversation with our panelists today. And I'm thrilled to be joined by Monica Eaton Cardone, who's also, we're extremely grateful to also for her support of the Diversity Radar and as lead sponsor for the webinar session today. Also to Darren Franks in South Africa, who will be talking a little bit about some of the talent challenges and some of the things he's seen across the talent landscape over the last year and a half. To Sophia Nunes from Mambu, one of the co-founders and also head of culture and talent at Mambu, and finally also to Helen Panzerino at the London Institute of Banking and Finance, who's going to reflect a little bit, amongst other things, on the value of education and also the role that that's playing in building diverse, more gender-balanced teams. So perhaps all of us can just switch on our cameras just quickly, just to wave hello to everybody, just to prove that we're all live, active human beings. And I'm just now going to then just talk us through a little bit through some of the early data that we've gathered for the Fintech Diversity Radar. As I say, the full research launches in November, and we've got a long way to go until that in terms of gathering the data, but hopefully some of what we're going to show and talk about today will also blend into the discussion and give us something, a benchmark and a basis from which to form have a lively debate. So let me just come into this. So we've looked at 1,000 fintech companies across the globe. We've split those out sort of regionally, regional distribution, and we've essentially by region looked at the top funded companies in each region. What's on the screen here is the sort of the first pass at that. So we're just pulling in the US data, but on the screen there you can see really that things aren't great when it comes to the balance between male and female, women versus men founders. And interestingly, it does seem to look like there's very little difference between emerging versus developed regions. We're talking a sort of proportion of between 6 to 7% of all companies, of fintech companies globally, that have at least one woman founder. And just to iterate, we're talking here about the percentage of founders as a whole. These are not necessarily companies with sole women founders. The data set that we're building looks at a number of criteria. It looks at the founder balance, men versus women. It looks at the executive team, CEO through to CTO, through to chief operating officers. And it also looks at board members and the investors in those companies. And over the next 2 to 3 months, we'll be previewing and highlighting some more of the data that we're getting out of this data set. We're looking at regions too, and today perhaps we can, given the kind of regional split that we have from our panelists, spanning, as I say, Europe, Africa, and the US, we can reflect perhaps a little bit on some of the regional dynamics, some of the cultural dynamics behind driving diversity, between getting more women into the workplace and ensuring that a more diverse range of people succeeds in the companies that we work in. We've looked at, on the screen there in front of you is really the kind of one or two primary markets in each region that are doing best at women founders. And it's the, I'm afraid it's the smaller circles, not the larger, that represent the number of women-founded companies in each market. We've looked, as I say, we're starting to build a kind of correlation between funding and founding. And on the face of it so far, the leading regions seem to be Asia, North America. Equally, companies that have no female founders in Asia seem to have raised something like double to 2.5 times the amount of money that in the US that companies with at least one female founder. So, I don't want this to be a bleak conversation, but I do think it's a useful benchmark from which to start. And hopefully, as the purpose of what we're doing with this data gathering exercise as a whole is not to say that the world is awful, but it's to say, how can we improve? What are the actions that we collectively need to take, or what are the things that we need to do in terms of lobbying or negotiating with ecosystem stakeholders, or with government, or with regulators, or with educators to change the state of affairs. This is just really a sort of, a recap of some of the earlier stuff, really, which is where we're looking at leading countries with female-founded fintechs. That's firms that have at least one woman founder, versus those leading countries without any at all. And largely, I would say, the fairly similar. I do think what's very interesting that comes out of the data so far is as I said, that that there isn't actually much divergence between emerging markets versus what one used to call advanced world economies. And in fact, in some ways, emerging markets appear to be doing as well, if not a little bit better, at driving or enabling women-founded fintechs to succeed. Then just finally. And again, probably not a massive surprise. I think we all would have guessed this. We're looking at the size of companies versus the distribution of women founders. If you look at the dates, the larger majority of fintechs in our data set were founded within the last 5 years. Obviously, there were some with a longer lifespan. But given that, it's possibly not that surprising to see that the cluster tends to be of women founders in smaller companies. So the number across the bottom is number of employees. So we're talking about smaller companies here. So if anybody has any questions from the panel on this sort of part of the conversation, please do share them. As I say, we're going to be asking you, the audience, to come in with your questions. We do have some polls that we'd like to ask you. Some of those questions were asked before, so we'd like to do a sort of before and after, or a before and during comparison. But then I think now let's jump into the conversation, and delighted to introduce you to Darren, to Helen, Sophia, and of course to Monica. Welcome, everybody.
Thanks, Simon.
Hi, guys. We already have one question. Let me just see if there's anything. Oh, will we get a copy of the deck after the event? Yes, we're happy to share some of the data with you after the event. Fantastic. Good. Right. So I just wanted to kick off with a couple of questions across all of you. And I think, given the kind of breadth of geographies that we represent, within companies that you're running or have run, it really would be also good, I think, to start with a bit of a background as to what have been your individual experiences of climbing the ranks of your respective companies or founding your companies. And I suppose really, we have to talk about the C word. We have to talk about COVID, about the pandemic. And have we seen a jumping off point over the last 18 months? Have things changed in the sense that we think they have, in the sense that this is an issue that's being talked about much more consistently, in a much more concentrated way. But is that talk being turned into action? And Monica, perhaps as the sort of benefactor here and the supporter of this session today, perhaps you'd like to kick off. You founded a successful business. It's stood the test of time. You've done, you've gone through the pandemic and come out of it stronger. What's been your experience of building a company before having women in fintech became a thing?
So I've always been a huge fan of, making sure that a team is diverse. And I think, no offense to any males out there, but probably as women, we're a little bit more in tune to making sure that we have that mix, because in many cases, we are the minority. But I will say, and we were having this discussion before, in terms of, just being able to recruit individuals that are qualified at the levels that our organization needs, it's challenging because there's not enough applicants. And, maybe it's the confidence level, maybe it's, certain industries that are almost, pigeonholed, where, we need to break through some of that traditional mindset, to just recognize this is, in payments, in technology, arguably, this is an industry for every walk of life, every talent, every skill set, and it's one of the fastest growing in fintech specifically, with lots of changes. So many opportunities for problem solving. But I will say that, being going through the pandemic and being essentially forced, just like the rest of us, where we have to think even more outside the box, has opened different doors to figuring out how to work, with people. We expanded into our Singapore center through the pandemic, and normally this would have been something that I thought, well, we need to fly there, we need to go there, but it's like, okay, necessity has increased, and we're just going to have to produce some different functions and think different. So there's no excuse any longer.
I like that. No excuse. Sophia, the other end of the table, Mambu is a newer company and scaling. What's been your experience? You're also a co-founder, and now you're trying to build a culture which presumably focuses on diversity and inclusion. What's been your experience over the last couple of years, but also, personally, have things started to change, and what do you think are what have been some of the challenges for you within, or as Mambu, what are some of the challenges of achieving what Monica's been focusing on also?
Well, for us, I think we were lucky to have started from a diverse team. The origins of Mambu are a diverse team. So we, the three co-founders, came from this program where we put 5 people together in working in a project, coming from different backgrounds, different walks of life, different nationalities. And that's essentially how Mambu was born. So that was very much our mindset when we created Mambu, that we really wanted to have a diverse team. And it wasn't so easy. Initially, we were also based in Stuttgart, south of Germany, where it was not so easy to attract diverse talent. We decided to move to Berlin just because of that, essentially to be able to tap into a more diverse talent pool. And at that point, we were able to do that. And since then, we've been growing a little bit organically, I want to say, without putting so much attention, because we were also lucky enough to be able to attract that diverse talent pool for the different roles and leadership level at all levels in Mambu. But at this point, and at the pace that we're growing, we also see the need of focusing more and more on that and being more intentional in focusing in our DI strategy and paying more attention on the policies, on the processes, on the systems that we have in place to evolve that culture and to make sure that it continues being inclusive and that we're able to bring that diversity that we always wanted to have in the first place.
Okay. Thank you very much, Sophia. Darren, I'll come to you next, and then to Helene, and Darren, to you next specifically. Not just as the token man, although I suppose I'm a man also, but as a panelist, you're in the minority today. Sophia, and Monica both talked about diversity being a focus, and Sophia specifically about diversity from inception. That's great if you're an early stage company, if you're one of the companies at the kind of beginnings of its life cycle. But there are lots of larger fintech companies out there, and some of these, as we can see, many of them, the majority of them aren't diverse. So what does the talent pool look like for trying to change it? And what are what sort of questions are you being asked by organizations across Africa and elsewhere that are trying to recruit, especially into key positions?
Yeah, well, I think if we focus on Africa, because that's clearly where my core experience lies. I think things have certainly changed, but the one thing that I think we see as a common trend is people being deliberate. We have to make a deliberate effort to transform into being a more diverse and inclusive business. And I think there is a key difference between having diversity and having inclusiveness. A lot of the bigger companies, large companies, tend to look at sort of diversity and say, okay, well, it's just something else we need to take off, and that doesn't really help anyone, quite frankly. It's more about inclusion. So it's all very well and good going out and hiring a diverse workforce, but how you would include them in the business to actually have a real voice and really make an impact. So that's one of the key things that we see with perhaps later stage companies or more developed companies or fintechs, payments codes, definitely. But there is definitely more awareness. I think, Simon, forums like this and some of the other things that obviously Findexable are doing, some other communities are really driving that message, and it's now, I think, top of mind, well, certainly near top of mind for a lot of executives about not only the importance of having diversity, but what does that mean and what impact does that have for the business? Because ultimately, people want to make sensible business decisions, and there's so much data that supports having a diverse, not only leadership team, but having a diverse business impacts the full spectrum of how the performance of that entity or that organization. So we're certainly seeing a lot more talk, but some tangible actions that are happening across the continent. Again, if I look back over the last 4 years, over 40% of the leaders we have placed as talent in the cloud in Africa have been women, right? And we're super proud of that. It took a dip last year, to answer your question based on the C effect. It took a dip last year, and we were trying to sort of fathom why that was, and maybe we'll come on to that a bit later on. I think there are perhaps some reasons. We have seen over the last 4 months or so an increase in the numbers, which is fantastic. But companies are coming to us saying, listen, we want to hire a diverse team. We want to do it because of these reasons, and that's fine. Companies just say, listen, we just need to hire some more women. Can you help us? No, because it's more than that. I don't think anyone, quite frankly, wants to be hired or wants to be considered for a job just because they're a certain gender or they're a certain ethnicity. People want to be, I think anyway, sought after because of the skills and the experience they bring to the table, regardless really of sort of colour or creed or religion or what have you. So that's kind of my view. Africa's doing some great things. Clearly the report that you just displayed on the previous few slides doesn't paint the most positive picture, but I do think if we rewind the clock forward, a couple of years, I'm pretty optimistic that will change.
Yeah. Well, I think that's right, and that's what we've got to do. I think a big part of this, and we'll talk about that also, is the lack of data that gives us the picture on which to base decisions and or encourage, incentivize, drive change. Helen, you've had I don't want to say a long career, but you've had a diverse career across fintech. You're now in an organisation which is trying to kind of improve skills across the board around digital banking, digital finance. What's been your experience, through your career and over the last 2 years, and what do you see as the kind of the value that you can bring through the Institute of Banking and Finance to changing the status quo?
Yeah, and it's been actually really interesting listening to everyone, and I've been taking some notes. I'm going to go back to Monica and talk about role models and things like that as well. LIBF was established in, I think, the 1870s. So it has got a very rich history, and actually at LIBF itself, it's quite balanced. You fall into that trap sometimes in education, that you have lots of women who are the educators, and the class is composed of many men, but we don't seem to have that problem. And I was thinking about this period of the pandemic, and we launched a couple of new programs, the Certificate in Fintech Practitioner being one of them, which is a short course. And what I realized is, again, Darren, you're talking about large companies doing the tick box. What I realized is that the people coming on this course were the people who were self-enrolling.
Right.
It was less about the HR department or the L&D department or anybody like that in the large organization. It was people self-enrolling. And for me, I also experienced this year, and I think this might be part of it, the fact that we couldn't go anywhere and we weren't in a room of 1 to 500. People were more accessible in this, you know, on our screens. And I think there was a feeling of people giving more across the board, not just in fintech, but in financial services. And so if you wanted to reach out to some of your role models or see your role models, you could actually have a conversation with them, whereas you might not have been able to if you'd gone to the massive conference and there were 2,000 of them and you're sitting in the audience thinking, well, how am I going to engineer my way forward? So I think that we were able to connect with more people. We had them on as guests as well, and everybody was very giving. And I really hope that this continues after we're all back live. I saw more of women self-enrolling, and we had quite a balance. And of course, we've offered with Findexable and with Lend It scholarships for women who are looking to rise up the ranks if they're mid-career in fintech, which is great. We've been running webinars with people like Es Britton on the coding side to try and talk about the challenges that people of color have and from marginalized parts of our society and actually getting the tech skills and moving into real jobs, not just skilling up on an initiative and then not getting a job. So that was a positive. And as Monica was talking about problem solving, I was thinking when we have these conversations, I think the initial assumption is, are there women in tech with tech skills who are founding the fintechs? And it's all about the tech. But there are other skills, and there are other skills as founders who are looking for funding as well. And thank you to Monica for reminding us that it's not just about the coders, the devs, the engineers. Yeah. And the other half of my life is spent, you know, on the build side, on digital banking and with Vacuum Labs in Bratislava, where they're big supporters of the LGBTQ community, and they were part of the Build for Daylight, which is the LGBTQ banking platform in the US. So on a daily basis, I'm surrounded one way or another by people who are very positive about inclusion and diversity and see the impact, not just on the bottom line, but in the enjoyment that we have in the way we work. And we're also very conscious of bringing up the next generation and giving them opportunities. I'm a big fan of being an advocate of crafting real opportunities for people. So for us at LIBF, it's been a very positive thing. It has been aided, I think, partly by the pandemic. It's been great to be able to see role models and to see women being proactive themselves. In my own career, I started out in the third largest bank in the world. I had no idea what I was doing, I'll be honest. Pretty sure I was hired to be the token woman that spoke German and to take people out and entertain them. Because what was the credit risk in the DACH region in the 1980s? Zero. And I remember being conscious about it and thinking, well, you know, this is a means to an end for me, and I'll do that. I think the only other thing I'd say about my career is back in 2018, when I was at Rainmaking creating the Fintech Scale program, I can remember someone in our industry who I'm now very friendly with, launching something for Fintech Initiative and speaking to my then boss, Nectarios Liolios. Some of you might know Nectarios, lovely man, and not speaking to me. And then meeting me 2 years later saying, wow, I never realized that you knew so much and you knew so many people. And I said, that's because you weren't talking to me. You were talking to the man. You ignored all my emails. I tried. So you learned a little bit of a hard lesson that way. But it went to the CEO at that time, who was a man, and I was actually the engine driving the program. Thank you, Helen. Excellent. Yeah, I mean, you raise an interesting point, and I think before we move on to the kind of next sort of primary question, I do want to get a sense of, you know, is enough being done? You know, I think we're always at the risk in these kinds of fora of, you know, talking within the bubble, and of course, you know, as we can see from the data, the reality is actually extraordinarily different from our day-to-day experience. Monica, is enough being done? And if not, then why the hell not? And why aren't we doing more? How do we make that possible?
I would say there's definitely, is there ever enough being done on anything though? You can always do more, right? But there's, so definitely no, there's not enough for sure. And I think, I was just thinking of all the different comments, and I mean, I love speaking on panels like this. What a great group. But to hear, you know, some of the feedback and thinking through, you know, how many, and looking at the slide, Simon, that you were going over with the the sheer volume of men that are founding companies and hardly any women. You know, what I've learned is, and I think this actually spans across any minority, because it's a confidence issue. And I've seen this in our organization where, you know, let's forget the term founder and getting credit for starting a business, but there's many founders within an organization because they've developed a new process, they've solved a new problem, they've actually created like all these different business units within a company. And what I see as one of the biggest issues that we need to solve is increasing that level of confidence and changing the tradition of, you know, it's okay to just let someone else take credit, because that's just going to make things work better. And, you know, and actually challenging that. And I think, you know, we need to create more mentors, and make that, like, give more opportunities to expose those unsung heroes, because oftentimes they are the minority. And I think we would find that actually this founder, you know, chart is deceptive. There's probably many founders that are behind, you know, men that actually just haven't taken a stand to say, actually, I did this. and we see this, you know, in the layers of all of our organizations. But yeah, it's just, I was just thinking it's definitely a complex problem.
Yeah, it's very much like the bumper sticker of the 80s, isn't it? But behind every great male leader, there's a woman that got in there. Sophia, you know, thank you for that, Monica. It's a valid point. Sophia, you know, as a, you know, focusing on now in terms of your role, in terms of the culture of the organization, you know, how do you overcome, what are some of the sort of practical things that you're trying to do or have done that you see that work, that kind of, that kind of respond to what Monica was talking about there? Because this whole concept of not just of not being brave enough to speak out, or feeling that it's not your place to blow your own trumpet, but also this whole element of self-censorship which I wanted to talk about, which links back to what Helen was talking about at the skills front. We're not just talking about technology skills, are we? We're talking about softer skills, the ability to communicate in a way that's going to help us succeed in our career, but also perhaps not make us look like we're too much of an egomaniac.
Yeah, I love that piece. And I think it's really, really important what Monica said in terms of rewards and recognition. This is really, really important. And it's important for us to recognize what our work is and our impact and influence is. But it's also important, taking another piece that Monica also mentioned on the mentorship and allies, and finding allies and people who can actually do shout outs and actually advocate for others who might not have the voice, or might not are just too humble, or just don't realize the impact that they have with their work. And we at Mambu, we try to do that in a very simple way. Just we have a Slack channel, which is shout outs channel, and essentially allows people to give shout outs to people who have accomplished something. It doesn't have to be something major. It doesn't have to be a deal closed or a huge bug that was fixed. It can be just very simple things, but it's these daily and mundane things that go unnoticed otherwise, and that's accumulate over time. And if you look back at the history, and I wish we would have more data on this, because it's just a Slack channel, so we don't have an easy way to track these, but not yet. But if you look back and you start looking at the consistencies and what people actually value and what is being brought to life, I think it's really, really powerful. And another word to what Darren was mentioning earlier on the inclusion part, I think I couldn't agree more. Before we think of any diversity, I think we need to look inwards and see the inclusion piece, because without that, there's no diversity, because people will come and go because they don't feel the environment. They don't have an environment to thrive and to be themselves and to bring value to the company. So that's a really, really important piece. And then again, also something that Elaine mentioned, and I wouldn't want to leave unnoticed, it's this positivity element of the discussions in DEI. I think it's so important, and it's so easy to get into the negative and into what's wrong and what we need to improve, and get into this resentment kind of feeling in these discussions, where we can just open up and be a little bit bring a little bit of humor, why not? And just gather more allies this way, because when you go with a heavy face and just with all these problems and we need to solve this, you're in a way just putting a barrier in front of you. And I think this is a huge way of bringing in more allies than to push them away if we do that. So just 3 notes on on the panel, because I also love these discussions because of these thoughts that just bubble up. So thank you for that.
Thanks, Sophia. Again, we'll do this unintentionally, but we will follow the same order. Darren, I'll come to you and then to Hélène. Darren, you said that the quite different to I think what Hélène said earlier, which is that the pandemic has had a negative, potentially a sort of, from what you've seen, and a more negative effect on diversity of hires or hiring of women. What's your response to Sophia and Monica there?
I think it depends on different sectors and the roles. I mean, one thing we have certainly seen is, I think I'm going to generalize here, and I'm scared to do so in a room full of women. But so I'm ready for you to attack me. I've got broad shoulders, so if I say something that's wrong, please challenge me. But I think certainly what we've seen is women tend to be a little bit more risk adverse than men. And when we're talking about hiring leaders, and again, it's not people necessarily who are on the job market, it's headhunting, right? It's finding people who are readily employed and gainfully employed and enjoying clearly a very successful career, and trying to convince people, certainly during the early stages of the pandemic, then to sort of jump ship, move to a new organization where it's the complete unknown. It is a risk, because moving a job at any point there's an element of risk. And so we saw a lot of that. And I think, again, certainly in Africa, there was an expectation that actually, we're working from home, the husband and the mother are working from home, the husband and wife are both working from home, but there's kids being homeschooled, but actually that falls on the mother to lead that and lead the homeschooling. So I'm not commenting whether that's right or wrong. This is the wrong forum for that. But that's what we saw, and a lot of the feedback we were getting from candidates was actually, now's not the right time. I can't even think about a career move because I'm trying to keep, a family unit. I'm trying to keep my job. I'm actually trying to drive my business, and I'm doing all of these different things. And you know what? The last thing on my mind at the moment is moving to a new company. So that was the real life feedback we were getting. I just wanted to build on something before we somewhere on to Hélène. Something that Sophia was kind of very passionately talking about was the allies. And I wrote an article, again, please don't get your pickaxes out until I've finished my sentence. But I wrote an article last year, which was Fintech needs more men. And I got, honestly, because people don't read things, they just read the title, and then I was getting all sorts of abuse. But the message, do you remember that one? Yeah. But the message in that was actually, male allies play a really important part. If it's truthful, right, and if people are doing it for the right reasons and not just on some sort of PR bandwagon. But people like Simon, not to include myself on that. There are some other sort of pretty well-known people, certainly in the UK fintech scene, who really are stepping up to the mark and are being true male allies and are doing it for the right reasons. And I think there needs to be perhaps more of that. Well, not perhaps, there definitely needs to be more of that, because it is a male-dominated industry. I mean, they're, as Simon, as the data shows, that's just how it is. So I think there needs to be more of a voice. I think men need to have a bit more of a voice when it comes to promoting diversity. But again, it has to be authentic and it has to be for the real reasons. So that's kind of my view, and I'll get off my soapbox now. And if anyone wants to send me any pickaxes, then Simon will send you my email address.
I can hear the torch wielding villagers at the door as we speak. Hélène, there's a lot to digest across all of those comments. As an educator or an institution that's educating, people perhaps that are new into this market, soft skills clearly, highly valuable. I wonder, are you seeing a kind of generational change from our side? For example, we're working with some fresh graduates in sort of technology, but also that have come from a research background. And it's a very different personality from what I remember myself having when I left school. And I wonder, are you seeing are you seeing sort of a change in the way people, particularly women, are thinking about themselves, and are they, or are we in a situation where they still need more of that confidence, more of that kind of ability to realize that they don't need to self-censor, or they shouldn't, or certainly that they shouldn't have to?
So it's difficult, and actually the generation that is that young generation is lucky that they had people like me as their parents, because the boomers, we also made it economically okay for people to have some room to breathe until we hit a couple of bumps in the road. And there is an element of that. You can experiment when economies are good, and you're not bumping from one crisis or one economic crisis to another. Yeah. And as you're all speaking, I'm thinking about the mix in the groups and the mix in my other classes. So on the masters that I teach as well, it is, of course, I'm in the masters in fintech and entrepreneurship. You think that there would be more even split of men and women. It's getting better, but there are largely men in that group. At LIBF, I think we are quite balanced in it, because there are a lot of people that work in financial services. And so you see more of a balance in terms of learning, but a lot of it is self-driven. Also, let's not forget there are CPD credits, and people need to take a certain amount of learning anyway. So they're taking advantage of that. Darren, you speak about being risk averse and during the period of the pandemic. And as you were speaking, I was thinking it was something like 400,000 people in financial services globally that were let go or made redundant or doing. And my immediate reaction was, wow, someone giving me money that I could go start a business with, because I've been self-employed for the majority of the last 37 years. That never happens to me, right? And for me, it was that complete opposite reaction to being fearful, but what an amazing beginning. And I'm working on a knowledge simulator, accelerated experience learning in the banking space. But actually, what if we had that, where we could simulate to people safely what it would be like to take that money and go start your own business, or what that would be like to go through the process of trying to raise and co-create and put in all the things around that we're speaking about, just throw them all in as things I have to contend with, because we don't really get that experience, that chance to do it in a simulated world. I sometimes struggle with the engineered initiatives, as I'll call them, because I think they're a tick box exercise for a lot of people, and I would like them to have some authenticity. And I think that's the real trick, is to not just put them out there and say, oh, we've done that, we've put people here, we've interviewed people that way, we've hired people that way. And it has to go beyond saying, yeah, but we contribute to the economy and we make the day go better because we've got soft skills and we have hard skills that combine. I think we have to start really believing it. And back to both Sophia and Monica's points, we have to have people that speak for people, shout for people, but also show them the way.
Absolutely.
See the poll.
Yeah. So we've launched a poll, which sort of brings us quite neatly onto the sort of next issue of taking direct action, the affirmative action question that was already alluded to by Darren at the beginning. So please do take time to answer that. I'll also give you a bit of a clue in a minute as to what the people that we marketed this essential session to thought to that question as well. In the meantime, we've had a couple of questions. An anonymous attendee asks, cultural aspects are an issue in some regions, and it's the reason why women never start their career. Well, I think we can all attest to that. I think certainly Darren sort of alluded to that, certainly in emerging markets, but I think equally in plenty of developed markets, we're still seeing that anyway, as we can see from the data. Jacqueline asks, what's the best way for women with little to no experience in fintech to get started? Well, perhaps Helen, Monica, Monica, you started a career in fintech, and you did it in a I say a sneaky way, but you did it in a canny way to kind of get going. Perhaps the two of you could come at a couple of useful tips for Jacqueline there. Monica, do you want to start with that one? Oh, you're on mute, I think.
Yes. It definitely makes sure that people can hear you, number one. I think like most of us, right, we fell into banking probably by accident. I think in any career, just one piece of advice to women, and I appreciate Helen's feedback, as well as Sophia, you spoke on this a little bit as well. Any career, any job that you get, and I would be willing to start out at the very bottom. Don't reach for the top immediately, because I think, we take for granted how much power there is in proving yourself. Not only does this build this amazing foundation of self-worth that no one can shatter, right? If you actually produce things and you accomplish things, then you're going to have a very strong self-esteem. Now you just need to work on improving those soft skills, getting a mentor, and making your voice a little bit better. But I would suggest find a company that aligns with some passion that you have of where you want to go, and then do whatever it takes to get in at any level. You don't need to, and realize people that make a difference are going to shine, and they're going to stand out. And don't lose hope in making sure and really dig in and make a difference. And every organization really loves problem solvers. They love self-starters. These are not characteristics that are different, any organization. So oftentimes I see people starting out in a career and they think, well, I'm just hoping. And Sophia, I love the idea of the Slack channel. I'm actually going to steal that for our organization as well. That is brilliant. But you can't sit back and think, well, someone is going to see what I'm doing. You need to take the initiative. And also, I think there's two types of people, or maybe not people, two types of mentalities. You can have a mentality of, I'm too afraid to make a mistake, and so I'm just going to wait for someone to tell me every single step to take. And you're not going to get very far if that's the mentality that you choose. You can also have a mentality that says, it's okay if I fail, and what's most important is that I do what it takes to achieve my goal. And that means you're going to build that muscle that's going to get you through, and you will fail your way to success. All of us do. This is just what happens. But if you have that perseverance and that work ethic, then I think you could start out, get hired anywhere at any level, and then prove yourself and learn, understand the voice that you have, and that should get some attention to get you where you want to be in payments, or probably in any career for that matter.
Thank you, Monica. Excellent. Helen and also Sophia, do chime in. So I didn't mean to exclude you from that actually, but Helen, what's your take?
No, it's actually, and I'm still in the Slack channel thing as well. I think it's wonderful. Thank you, Sophia. and actually, Monica, every time you say it, I'm thinking problem solving, and I'm listening to you talk about failure. I think so. Part of my life, I'm looking at, I help the SMEs raise finance, and lots of different companies raise finance. Women over 55 in this country are able to tap 25% of their pension tax-free. The pandemic threw up a lot of people that were being let go. We have a lot of people that had side gigs that they're turning into businesses, and I'm trying to help them understand the funding journey in that way. So it's not only about the 18, 19, 20, some odd year olds that are starting to enter the market from that end of their career. It's about the reskill, the other end of the market as well, and people who think they want to go out and do something different. As Monica, when you were speaking initially, I was thinking also about people like Joanne Dewar from GPS, who took time out to raise her children and then came back into payments. And when we did a podcast, and she was very open about telling me about her kids and how she, didn't really expect that she was going to take the role that she took. She was very frank about it. And I thought, in our industry, quite brave for her to come out and really be open and pragmatic and down to earth about it. And I want other women to hear that. And where you are a high achiever, the word failure is such an anathema to high achievers. And many people that we'll encounter are in that category. So, and back to someone's question, point about where you come from in certain parts of the world. If you come from a part of the world, or from a group that says you can't do anything, but you know that you have the skills, and then you set your own bar really high, how do you talk yourself into going into saying, my passion is here and I'm going to go in at any level, and when I'm in, I'm going to find somebody to help me because my passion's here, but I've been told my whole life that I shouldn't be doing this. and I don't want to fail because failure is not in my vocabulary. These are all tricky and complex, as you said before, complex issues. And I don't mean this in a deprecating way, but I don't think men have this in the majority of men. Just kind of go in with I'm just going to go in there and do it. And whatever happens, the chips are going to fall where they fall. And we have this conversation always when we talk about funding. Why don't women get more funding? And I sit there and say, because men actually realize maybe that of the 10 investments, like 2 of them are going to fly and 5 of them are going to die. So don't worry about it. They know that when they put the money on the table, you don't have to give them a return. You will anyway, because it's been proven, but you don't have to go into it worrying about returning that money. And that kind of, that is a split that's been studied very often. So I think that it's been really, for me, this has been fantastic because I can now start to think about ways to do things that are positive.
Good.
Having that a voice.
Good. And Sophia, again, both what Helen and Monica are talking about is very much about building an enabling culture, isn't it? A culture where success is not, success is as much about tolerating failure as it is about succeeding, working through the challenges. What advice would you like to give for Jacqueline, if there's anything else to add?
Yeah, I would say just be open to opportunities, and also just adding to what Helena and Monica already said, but leverage your network too, right? Because there's a lot of potential. Sometimes we just don't realize how much power we have in our networks and how much we can leverage that. And just in terms of mentorship, in terms of just learning, really, it doesn't mean that it's someone who will give you a job, right? That's not what I mean, but just in terms of adding new skills and just talking to people who have been through that experience and just sharing that learning and those stories, and finding a mentor, finding someone, a role model. Just don't minimize the power of your network. So that was the only 2 things that I would add to what Monica and Milene said.
Thank you very much. Excellent. Absolutely. Networks are key. And on that front, which we'll turn to Darren in a second, because he's an arch network builder. But before that, let's just reflect a little bit on the poll, which is just an interesting point. Darren, at the beginning, you talked about affirmative action as really being, not being the way forward. Interestingly, nobody on the poll on the audience today has selected affirmative action as a viable place to drive a diverse workplace. When we asked that question before today's session, actually about a quarter of the respondents said that affirmative action was a key way to build a diverse workplace, diverse workforce. Of course, as we've seen from the data, the reality is that diversity, certainly at the level of women versus men within fintech firms, is the state of affairs is pretty dire, and some sort of direct action surely must be needed. It's also interesting to see that the last couple of years have actually been record years for funding of all technology startup companies. A quarter, I think, as of 2020, a quarter of VC funding in total now goes into fintech firms. So we're not talking about something which is a niche issue. We're actually talking about something which plays right to the core of the future of business and the future industries. So Darren, I think you kicked this off and said, affirmative action isn't the way forward. So how now can we come together to accelerate change? Are we talking about regulation? In some cases, and certainly the UK has led with insisting that 1/3 of board seats are given to women, and certainly when those initiatives are deployed, they do suddenly seem to be able to find all sorts of suddenly suitable applicants for these jobs. So what's your take there, and what's the mood like, I suppose, in Africa, in the sense of more mandated action? Is that something that people are talking about or would like to see discussed?
Be careful how I answer this one. I think when you regulate something like this, you end up ticking boxes, quite frankly. I think you end up doing something because you need to be compliant. Okay. Does it drive the right actions, and does it drive inclusiveness? Going back to the point I made a little earlier on, I'm not sure. I think it would certainly get diversity numbers up if that's the metric, but would it actually drive the inclusion? For me, that's probably the most important part of this, right? So I don't know what can be done more. Definitely more forums like this. I think there needs to be more awareness, and I think what we've seen, and I'm hoping the data when we relook at this maybe in a year's time is going to reflect what I'm about to say. But I think because of communities like this, the European Women in Payments Network, the African Women in Fintech and Payments Networks, all of these communities that are actually grouping together to say, come on, we have some amazing talent, right? And I think people say, oh, there's a shortage of talent. There's a shortage of talent globally for every skill, right? Certainly when we were talking about development, regardless of gender, right? There's a shortage of talent, and that's just a fact. Now, I challenge people, certainly here in the continent, in Africa, when they say there's no talent in Africa. There's absolute, I'm not going to swear because I'm rude for the ladies, that's absolute rubbish, right? People just don't know where to look, or don't look hard enough and think that, oh, well, we can't find anyone, so we're just going to fly in an expat. And the same applies for women as well. Oh, we can't find any women, they don't exist. Nonsense. You're just not looking in the right places. Or you haven't got a brand, an employer brand that appeals. And that's a really key thing. So I think if there's one takeaway for anyone that's perhaps looking at their employer brand, is it gender agnostic, right? Is it appealing to everyone? I mean, there's lots of studies that were done. I was just going to mention one thing off the last question, which was, how can you get into sort of fintech, or how can you get into get a role? Again, there's lots of research that says, women will only apply for a role if they meet like 95% of what's written on the job description. My advice is, don't do that. If you broadly match, the job description in some way, shape, or form, have a go, right? Apply, but back it up with something. Don't just click send, because it's very easy to apply for jobs these days, but back it up perhaps with a covering letter or a LinkedIn message to the hiring person or the hiring manager. But back it up, but you kind of need to be a bit brave, okay? And don't fear rejection, and don't fear getting that sort of automated thanks for your application and you haven't been successful. That's just part and parcel of sort of searching for a new career. So I would definitely sort of leave on that advice. But what can be done? You mandate something, well, okay. I think things like, if an organization, or there was an organization that had some sort of certification or awareness, and actually you could wear a badge as Mambo or as Talent McLeod and go, hey, we are part of this community who supports gender diversity, okay? And these are the things we're doing. It's not just a label. These are the actual things we're committed to doing. So like a charter. So I think if there was a sort of an international charter, certainly one that was relevant to sort of fintech and payments, then that I think would go a long way. And look, 80% of my team are women, right? So I fully embrace all of this. But yeah, that's kind of my thoughts. Again, I don't know whether it's from an African lens, maybe that's probably more of a global lens, but I'd love to hear everyone else's views on this as well.
Yeah, Monica, I think at the session that we were in a couple of weeks ago, we spoke a little bit about this concept of helicoptering in people that look the right part based on what we want to present our companies as. We've also talked about mandated quotas, regulation driving change. Tell us a little bit about your thoughts on this subject.
Yeah, we went through. I think what we were talking about was, a top-down and bottom-up approach. So, we definitely need. We need to look at how we can have more inclusion. I 100% agree with that, and definitely concur with the comments from Darren. But we also need that bottom up, just a shift in the traditional culture that we've had. And this is something that really, I mean, I would look at every single parent has an opportunity to be a mentor. They are a mentor, right? Every manager should be a mentor, and being a mentor, and even, you know, every employee. This is something. This is not a skill or a title that is reserved for the ultra elite. This is actually something that all of us can take responsibility to create, and that will help, you know, improve the culture. Because I also believe with that, you know, we need to really improve the culture of these organizations so that it is inviting, and people do, you know, that's going to help build the right narrative and endorse the skill set that can grow naturally.
Thank you very much. Excellent. I couldn't agree more. Helen, Sophia, anything to add? No? Lost for words?
I just no. I was going to let Sophia speak. And actually, every time I listen to Monica, I keep thinking of the word confidence, and also hiring for potential and ability, and not for set skills. And I can't get this thing out of my head about the tech. You were talking about problem solving. When you go to some of the, and I agree with you, Darren, you should apply for the job if you think you could wiggle your way into this, somehow just get in there. But if you're hiring for specific tech skills and you don't have them, how do you get over the fact that you have some other skills and you could learn those skills? So you want to be able to hire for the broader ability of somebody, and not necessarily pigeonhole them into, oh, you're the dev, go do that, you know? And when we in my UCL class, we always get the techies that would come on the entrepreneurship course because they wanted to understand, quote unquote, the rest of the business, because we are all in this together. And Monica, you're right. I mean, I wasn't going to say this, but as you're all talking, I'm thinking my mother was incredibly negative when I was growing up, telling me I could do nothing and I should stay where I was. Incredible, which was her own background coming out, right? The whole victim of victims.
Right.
My father, on the other hand, was like, this is my daughter. She can do whatever she wants to do. And isn't she amazing? And you kind of go through life thinking, why was I listening to that woman? Because she's an integral part of your life as a child. That's why, right? At one point, I remember thinking, okay, I can do whatever I want to do. And the person holding me back is me. And when people criticize me for their own lack of confidence, I need to be able to actually understand, I know what's going on. Some people in our circle don't know this is going on. So there's a power in being aware of the situation that we're in and being able to make that change as well. So we're not victims, I'm saying.
Absolutely. We must leave it there sort of fairly shortly. We're coming up to the end of time now. Sophia, you know, I think everything seems to point back to building an enabling, inclusive culture. If you've got anything, you know, talk about some of the sort of practical actions you've already taken. Who are you as an organisation or as an individual looking to when it comes to how to kind of move things forward and build that kind of culture that you're striving for? Because it's not just something, it's not a one and done approach. It's something you don't just write these policy manuals, use the right words, and then leave it to gather dust on a hard drive any longer. You know, it's something that is it's consistent work, isn't it?
Yeah, not at all. So when it comes to DI on Mambo, and like I said, we are becoming more and more intentional about this. We are, first of all, we need to reassess or assess our current landscape, right? It's very important to understand where you stand on the DEI journey. You can't just start writing policies, like you said, and define your strategy based out of nothing, because if you don't have the data, if you don't know where you stand at the moment, that will mean nothing, right? So you need to be able to identify issues, identify the challenges that you have, and define that strategy based on those. So that's what we're doing at the moment. We're also identifying, and will continue identifying, the leaders who can be those allies and sponsors of the initiatives that we will want to move forward with. And I think those three pieces are really important. So first, assess the landscape, identify what are the core elements of that DI culture that you have at the moment. What are the challenges? Then define your strategy and go from there. I think that's fundamental.
Thank you very much, Sophia. I was going to just take a quick round the virtual room statement from each of you as we wrap this up. Darren, we'll start with you. If you come back here in 5 years, where would you what change would you like to have seen in the world?
I'd like to not have this conversation in 5 years' time, quite honestly. I think that would be the real mark of improvement. Not to be talking about this, but to be talking about something else. I think that would be the ultimate goal. I think for everyone who's clearly involved and passionate about this topic. So yeah, that's a very political answer, isn't it?
It's the right one. Monica, benchmarks, role models, who are you looking to now to kind of see how to kind of take this forward, or indeed inspire other companies that are scaling or starting out to take the right path when it comes to building a team that's natural.
Sorry, Simon, you're breaking up just a little bit. Are you saying what are our benchmark? Can you just repeat that one part?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. What's your kind of benchmark? What do you or role model? Who are you looking to when it comes to kind of trying to inspire others to build diverse cultures and diverse teams and inclusive cultures?
So you know what, I love reading books. I love reading like business books, self-help books. Like I'm definitely one of those junkies. And so something that that I've looked at, internally with our organization is stepping away from, and I think this is more modern as well, stepping away from a traditional hierarchy pyramid structure and establishing more of a holarchy or a role-based management structure. And to Helene's point, there are just amazing people that have amazing skills that will do what it takes, and they're quick learners. And for every organization, I would love to see just a change culturally where we all learn a lesson in, if you hire somebody who has passion and they love what they're doing and you give them an opportunity, the ROI on that individual salary is far more substantial than somebody that has all the right skills, but they're just doing a job. But in order to get that, and I look at Google and things that all of the leading organizations, they've challenged this kind of that structure, and they've said, to even find that Google makes an announcement that they no longer care about college degrees. They're hiring 19-year-olds. And this, I think, is the way of the world, where we say, you know what, you can be whatever you want. To Helene's point, we need that voice that the sky's the limit, and nobody is going to set your own potential but yourself. So I would love to see that type of thing change a little bit, and we see more entrepreneurs and just a difference.
Absolutely, yeah, fantastic. Thank you, Monica. Helene, then over to you. As the school, what would you like to achieve in the next 5 years, and what difference? How are you going to gauge the success of what you're doing with the institute?
Very interesting, isn't it? Because people come on courses and they expect, what can I do? Not the LAB, of course. What do I have to do to get a 70? What skill am I walking away from? Can I get a job in an investment bank after this? To which I always reply, go to somebody else's class. So I think we have to also break that chain on the education side to remember why we're educated. It's not about pieces of paper and numbers and what necessarily the door that it can open. It's a process of learning and enriching. And to go back to Monica again was saying, I would love to see the shift where we're hiring people for ability. That would be amazing, absolutely amazing. And board members as well, to push that down and try and bring that into companies.
Fantastic, absolutely. Sophia, just a quick final word from you then. If we come back in a couple of years' time, what will you have achieved in terms of the culture at Mambu, and what would you hope we would be able to see? You're on mute, I think. No. Still on mute. All right, I think it might be a technology issue.
I was totally on mute. Sorry. I was saying just I would wish at that point in 5 years that we can actually be leading the DEI strategy in a way that can be used as a role model in the fintech industry. Honestly, that's my aspirational goal, and I think it's good to have some aspiration in this field. And I honestly think we should stay positive. Like Helene, I can stop thinking about those words, and I think it's so important to keep these discussions going, but in a positive way. And I think that's actually the way that will drive more people on our side and drive this forward. So that's what I hope.
Thank you very much, Sophia. Well, we must leave it there. Our thanks again to all our panelists today, to Monica, to Helene, to Sophia, and to Darren, our honorary man on the session today. Thanks all of you for joining us. I think it's pretty clear that we all need to work hard, individually, collectively, at working to make our cultures more inclusive, more enabling, to allow more people to succeed from more diverse backgrounds. And at the level of the candidates themselves, it's really about, well, it's certainly about identifying the cultural fit that's right for you in the organisation. It's also about being bold, being a little bit brave, and taking risks, and identifying that kind of organisation that's going to let you be the individual that you are. That potentially is going to be a culture where failure is not a dirty word. But we wish all of you lots of success. Again, thanks to our panelists today. Thank you, Monica, and to Chargebacks911 for supporting today's session. It's been a really invigorating conversation. I hope you as panelists and you, the audience, have enjoyed it with us today also. We'll be obviously sending around the link to the session to all the panelists today here. Those of you that have requested the PowerPoint slides, we will send them out also. And we'll be sharing the broadcast today for those of you that want to view it after, and that will be available online and on our YouTube channel. Thanks. That's enough words from me, but again, thanks to our panelists and thank you to the audience today. Have a great evening and or morning or day, depending on which time zone you're in, and stay safe, stay well. Thanks very much.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Monica.
Likewise.
Bye, everyone.
I'm going to